Good morning, everyone. This is Valerie Edgeworth. I am a continuing education consultant at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives, and we are here today to talk about understanding knowledge transfer. Here with me is Alicia McGrath, also a continuing education consultant, and she will be taking care of the chat box for me today. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and type those in the chat box, and Alicia will make sure that they are answered and remind me when I forget. Also, I've made available in the bottom left-hand corner, in addition to the handout that you received on your reminder email, the slides are also available, and the slides will be available again at the end of the presentation if you want to get the full page slides in addition to the handout that was sent earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over our screen here real quick, and we will get started with knowledge transfer. I do have a lot of faith in Alicia, so we're going to have a good time today, so feel free to ask any questions. This is a very interactive webinar, so feel free to share any experiences you may have had. And just to kind of get us started here, knowledge transfer is kind of a 21st century buzzword on related to our organizations and making sure that things run smoothly, regardless of who our staff is. And the reason this webinar came about for me is I've been in state government long enough that I have experienced 3 large retirement series in our agency here. And so I've seen a lot of individuals retire in my 15 years of employment, and some of these career individuals have served 30, 35 years at the agency in a variety of positions, and with them goes a knowledge base that is crucial for us to be able to continue our work here at the agency. And so this kind of will give you a general overview of ideas and ways that we can ensure that necessary knowledge for our institution stays so that we can continue our functions and our processes in more of a seamless process. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want to give a credit to these 2 resources here. I use a couple of their handouts in the presentation. And then here's kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to give you a couple different definitions of knowledge transfer and what it is, what it means, how to practice it. We're going to talk a little bit about learning styles, just because generationally we do things differently, and we need to be aware that we are not all the same, nor do we have the same processes in order to complete a task. We're going to talk about different methods to transfer knowledge, barriers to transferring knowledge, some of the benefits, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. But again, feel free anytime during today's webinar to go ahead and ask those questions. So here's a couple of definitions about what knowledge transfer is. And it just says the practical problem of transferring knowledge from one part of an organization to another. It seeks to organize, create, capture, or distribute knowledge to ensure its availability for future users. Knowledge transfer is not about transferring knowledge alone. It involves the willingness of the other party or recipient to absorb the knowledge to his or her benefit. And it's more than just a communication tool or problem. If this were the case, we might be able to just send a memo or an email out to our group. So we're going to talk today about we participate in knowledge transfer in every single day of our life, even though we don't realize it. And in our private lives, we do it on a daily basis. One example of this is asking for directions. We may be on vacation in a town that we're not familiar with and stop at the gas station, and as we're filling up the car, go in and ask the attendant there, can you tell me where such and such is located? And they will give you those directions from the location that you're at to that building that you're looking for, and that is a transfer of knowledge from one person to another. So again, it sounds kind of like it's a very in-depth topic, and it can be, but it can also just be as simple as talking to Waze or Siri and getting a question answered. In organizations, effective and sustainable knowledge transfer is very complex. Knowledge resides in our organizational members, our tools, our tasks, and our subnetworks. And much of this knowledge is tacit or hard to articulate. So we can come in every day to our jobs and do our jobs very well. But could we actually sit down and explain to someone what we do on a daily basis? And that can be very, very hard. And that's what the knowledge transfer process is all about, is to try and make that easier. Another reason this webinar topic came about for me is that life happens, and there are times in your life where we want to be at work, but medically or family-related problems or other things may occur as well. And at that point, work has to continue whether or not we are able to be in the building. And so this is another example of why knowledge transfer is extremely important, so that others can help us when we are not physically able to be on the job. So, in knowledge transfer, age matters. I start with a caveat in this section, and I also end with one. Just because I write on paper or on our PowerPoint here that we've got certain ages and certain dates for a certain learning style, that doesn't mean that everyone fits the mold. I personally, myself, fit between 2 different learning styles, and that's all right. But in understanding the knowledge transfer process, we have to understand who we're dealing with, if we're the giver of information or if we're the receiver of information, so that we can make sure that their learning styles are being met so that the knowledge can be transferred in a good manner for all participants involved. So this is just a little overview real quickly of the 4 generations of learning styles. And again, we talk about the matures or veterans. We still do have a few individuals in the workforce who were born between that time period of 1925 and 1945. Our baby boomers, born after 1946-ish and before 1964, boomers and their predecessors were educated through a formal classroom instruction setting, and they are used to paper and textbooks, things that they can physically put in front of them. They are considered digital immigrants. They did not grow up with computers. They do tend to like hard copies. Not everyone, but some do. And their learning styles are more verbal and text-driven. They're formal, and they're more deductive. They have a logical approach to handling tasks or projects. Let's talk a little bit about Gen Xers. Basically between 65 and 1982, they're business casual. They like a mixture of formal learning and informal learning. They like to find solutions to problems. And they've adopted technology, so not necessarily born with it, but had it at a very young age. And then we've got our Gen Yers, or millennials, again, roughly 83 to 95, are considered to be more digital natives, learn more by discovery and exploration. They want to do and discover for themselves, not necessarily be told a formal process. They have a jump-in approach, want to get in there in that trial and error and see how it works. And connectivity is a hallmark for them. They want to be able to network and connect on many, many, many different levels here. So once again, closing this section with my caveat, when making generalizations about a group, you must be cautious. One will still find differences within generations and differences between them. So, any comments or questions regarding the definition of knowledge transfer or understanding the different learning styles? Any comments? I will personally let you know that I have both the traits of a Gen Xer and a Gen Yer. There are things that I am very formal about. There are things I'm very informal about. There are things I like to connect with. And there are times that I just want to focus on the problem, find the solution, and move on. So, again, not everybody's going to fit the one mold of just one type of generation there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the knowledge transfer life cycle. And we're going to talk about all of these different steps and some different ways that we can transfer knowledge for the availability of future users and staff members. So you have to identify and value what the knowledge is that you're wanting to transfer. This could be a policy, a procedure, opening and closing the library. There's multiple things that this could be. You have to validate and document it. You have to publish and share it. You have to transfer and apply it, and then learn and capture it. And we're going to talk about all these steps. So let's talk about step 1, identifying and evaluating knowledge. Knowledge does not exist in a vacuum. It has to be defined. We've got to understand the context of it, the impact it has, why it's important, how we apply it, and information for future research if needed. And answers to all of these questions are essential. You can't really say, I'm going to identify the knowledge and then I'll figure out how I'm going to push it out to our staff and then I'll go back and document why it's important. This is one of those processes that you actually kind of do need to follow the steps in order. So in the knowledge transfer process, you have your sources of information, those who have been here for decades, your individuals who have may have created a process that are still the keeper of the process 25 years later. You also have your receivers of knowledge. And so we talk about givers and receivers. And these are the two parties. And I'm going to tell you up front, if both parties are not willing, this process is not going to work. So we have to have buy-in from both sides. We have to have the willingness of both sides. And we're going to talk about some of the barriers that come up after we discuss the steps. So both their sources and receivers of knowledge need to understand what's the nature of this knowledge. Why is it important for more than one person to know it? How are we going to use it? How are we going to continue to use it? Who are our target users? What are their learning styles, levels of expertise? Why is this knowledge critical for success? How is the user going to find this knowledge and access the knowledge? And how will it be maintained and remain relevant and usable? These are all a lot of questions that need to be answered. Any questions regarding step 1? Okay, moving on to step 2. Validate and documenting knowledge. Knowledge is extremely complex. The successful transfer of knowledge involves, again, both the giver and the receiver. It is always a two-way street. The knowledge source or the giver may need to be persuaded that there's a value in them transferring this knowledge to someone else. We've all had moments, I think it's human nature, where we just want to say, if I don't share this process or if I choose to keep this information to myself, then they can't get rid of me. Or this is what keeps me valuable. Why would I want to share this? Again, we have to break down that barrier and understand that we're talking about the institutional knowledge and why it's important for all involved. It's bigger than one individual. So putting that value on knowledge, they have to understand that this is going to take time, this is going to take effort. We have to have some motivators to help people to want to be involved in the process. And we're going to talk about some of that motivation here in a little bit. Putting a value on this knowledge also helps both the givers and receivers determine that their participation is worth the effort. So we also want to establish some performance expectations at this point. You're going to ask the giver to provide documented value of the knowledge and how they have used it in the past and why it's still relevant for the future. They may have to ask some subject experts with relative functions or peer groups if they've used this knowledge and why they continue that we should keep this knowledge up to date. And then if there's any other stories or anecdotes out there that reflect the benefit of this knowledge, that's always really good PR, both internally and externally, as to why this knowledge is super important. So there's a couple different ways that we can publish and share information that's been gathered in the knowledge transfer process. And the two different ways are called the push approach or the pull approach. And I've got a question here for you after this slide. So a push approach is more of like publishing information. You place it on your website, your intranet, if you have a newsletter or a publication. Anybody who wants to receive that knowledge can go out and find it on their own. The other approach is called the pull approach, and that's facilitated sharing between givers and receivers through various methods. So, for example, we here at KDLA, we have a intranet website that all staff have access to, and that's where a lot of information is put out for us to go and find. It has weekly schedules of all the staff members, so you can look and see if somebody's going to be in the office or if they're in a meeting and you're in panic mode and trying to find them and you can't. You can see if they're in a meeting, if they're in the building, if they're out of the building somewhere else. Information regarding our health insurance, being a government employee, and different resources and services we have are placed on that intranet, as well as a staff directory. So when we get new employees, they will put that information up there and give us a little bit of information about them, their interests, their hobbies, so that we can learn about our new employees. So that's our intranet. Does anyone out there in library land have anything similar that they use in the knowledge transfer process among staff? Jackie, thank you so much for sharing that. Do you find that intranet to be helpful? Staff meeting notes is a great thing to post on your intranet, and we actually do that as well. Our management team and leadership will post minutes there of their management team meetings so that us staff who are not. New procedures, yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Rebecca, we have a staff folder with information that we share with everyone. Great. So everyone knows where that staff folder is located, I assume, and that they can go to that folder and get the information they need. Yes. Doesn't have to be tech savvy. Doesn't have to be electronic. The folder's a good idea as well. Perfect. Those are two great examples. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's move on to I believe we move on to step 4. Let me check. Yes, we do move on to step 4. Yay. Transfer and apply the knowledge. The receiver acquires and applies the knowledge, and this can be done through a variety of methods. Again, we've talked a little bit about how in our daily lives we transfer knowledge all the time, be it getting driving directions or various things of that nature. But in an institutional setting, there is no right or wrong way to transfer knowledge. You just have to take in all the factors we've talked about. So who are your givers of knowledge? Who are your receivers of knowledge? What things are they comfortable with? How can we make them see the shared value? We're going to talk about incentives like food later, and how pizza and snacks always makes everybody feel better about coming together and sharing, makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. So when we talk about the receiving knowledge, there are a few extra points to keep in mind. You've got to understand their level of expertise. What are they comfortable with? Do they have a preferred learning style? Are we applying this knowledge to the same environment? Are we talking about something within the library? Or are we talking about a different environment where the library is going to be involved in a community event and they want to take a program or a practice we've had at the library and apply it in a different setting? All those things have to be considered. And then that sometimes may just depend on the type of knowledge being transferred. So there's 3 different approaches that I have found to be, and most of the research as well states that these methods are the best for transferring knowledge. You either have a user need, you have it either depends on the type of context or the knowledge itself, or by the level of expertise. So when we're looking at a user's needs, this could be that an individual, a team, or an organization has a specific need. By context or type of knowledge, an individual, team, or organization may have a type of knowledge that they need to have transferred to another organization or team. And then by level of expertise, when the potential receiver of the knowledge has a specific level of experience, you want to make sure that you can cater to that, and that way they'll be more giving and willing to receive that knowledge. So I've been involved in a lot of different knowledge transfer processes over the years, and I mentioned to you earlier that I've had a couple of incidences in my career that have landed me out of the office for an extended period of time. I had an incident about 13 years ago where I was out for 21 days, and then I had an incident about 6.5 years ago where I was out for almost 3.5 months. These were not planned times to be out of the month or out of the office, but it just ended up that way. And regardless of me being here or not, there were certain processes and projects and things that had to be completed. And so we had to make sure that there were methods in place that people could just pick up the pieces and move on. So here's some of the different methods we talk about. We've got formal education and training, mentorships, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, paired work, apprenticeships, work shadowing, communities of practice, job rotations, interviews, guided experimentation, or even instant messaging. When I was in library school, I actually had a mentor from the University of Louisville, and she worked with me my entire 2 years that I was in graduate school and would help me with resume writing, sent me job offers, offered to review my resumes and things after I wrote them, and kind of just helped guide me in the profession and some of the things that I might thought I wanted to be and do when I grew up. So have any of you all ever been involved in any of these before with paired work or job rotation or trainings? I would love to hear about it. Jackie, question for you on training people in processing. Can you tell me some of the methods you use? Are you talking verbally with the person? Are they physically observing you doing these tasks? Do you have a manual or a information sheet that they follow? I'd love to hear some more detail on that. Okay, so Jackie, that's a side-by-side, so a one-on-one approach to that. Betty, Alicia's looking into your problem with the chat box, and you may need to log out and log back in. Is that what we're thinking? Might want to give that a try. And let's see, Barbara here. Every employee who's new to Children's Services. 2 weeks of shadowing story times, Barbara. Yes, and one-on-one trainings with librarians on specific topics. So the planning, the redirecting of behavior, and storytelling. Yes, all of those services within the children's area are extremely important, and we want to make sure that our new employees are well trained and prepared to handle those story time sessions that they will be carrying out and observing. Those are all great examples of knowledge transfer. Anyone else have anything? I am not currently involved in this process, but KDLA is in the process of updating all of its policies, procedures, and processes. Thank you. Alicia's on that team. It's called the 3P team. And so I had to get that third process thing. So, and that is something that we're trying to make sure that everything is down and that it's up to date. Because again, many of us have been here for a long time, and we may have had a manual or a process when we started something, but things have changed in the last 20 years. So we want to make sure we're keeping everything up to date. Perfect examples. Thank you all for sharing. So there's a couple different factors that influence the knowledge transfer process. There's a relational channel between the individuals. That human-to-human connection is necessary to support the transfer of this knowledge. There might need to be some similarities between, again, we all work in a library, so that right there makes us similar in some way or fashion. Even if we have different functions within the library, we still have a common goal and outcomes that we want to reach as library employees. So that would be some of the similarities between the giver and the receiver of the knowledge. They might have similar backgrounds or level of experience. You want to make sure that you understand your organization. Individuals know what they know as well as what other people know. Do we understand the other processes that we do? Again, here at Libraries and Archives, we're divided into 3 sections. We have the Division of Library Services, we have our Archives and Records Management, we also have our Commissioner's Office. And we all have very different customers that we serve with very different needs. However, it's not uncommon for Alicia to get a phone call where her name starts with an A at the beginning of the alphabet, just because her name's at the top. And it might get a question for the archives, or it's not uncommon for someone to contact me regarding a question in the archives because I worked there for 10 years, but I've been gone for 4. So again, we have to understand at least the basics of who does what in our other divisions and areas so that we can at least direct them to the right person. We don't have to answer their question, but it can at least point them in the right direction. So, and there may be a divergence of interest between our givers and receivers of knowledge. And if there's a divergence of interest, then the knowledge is not going to be transferred. So we're going to talk about that benefit and barriers. Let's talk about barriers first. So I talked about earlier how we're all human, and sometimes we like to hold on to information because if I'm the only one who knows it, they can't get rid of me. Or they might assume that they need me forever because I'm the only person who knows how to do this process. So that's a huge barrier to knowledge transfer. Lack of trust, motivational issues, you've got a retirement countdown going on, or I only have to do this for 2 more months, so they're probably already on their way out the door. And that brings up another good point. You want to start the knowledge transfer process early, and it should be ongoing. Because if you've got someone who's getting ready to go out the door, they might have already decided they don't want to share. Again, generational differences, sometimes people just don't get along. And that's unfortunate, but that's just kind of reality. There could be some misconceptions as to why people don't get along generationally, and hopefully those can be discussed and worked through, and then we can move forward. Lack of interest. You might have an organizational culture that doesn't want to share. Again, knowledge is power. Bad interpersonal relationships, lack of incentives. Again, I semi-jokingly talked about pizza, but if you're going to have a nice big group meeting and you know it's going to last 3 hours, snacks are very much appreciated if you're going to be sitting around the table for 3 hours. There could be some technological limitations. Might have a lack of time, or they might have pride or low self-esteem. Either one can deter a successful knowledge transfer process. You don't want to be too prideful, nor do you want to feel like, oh, I only just do this. Our jobs are all important. Everything we do in our libraries is important, and we want to make sure that people understand that they are valued. So again, let's talk about those incentives real quick. 3 key incentives come into play. There's a reciprocity there. Both the givers and the receivers need to understand that there is a mutual benefit there for each of them. I am sharing what I know and all these different things, and it's going to be successful to the organization long after I'm gone. And our receiver needs to understand that I get to sit and be in this process with somebody who has decades of knowledge and experience, and I can learn from them and apply this in my daily work life situation. Recognition. I've had several libraries mention that their systems do have incentives when you complete programs and other things. It may get recognized at a board meeting or in staff day trainings and things of that nature, and it's good to receive recognition for a job well done. There are things that we do every day that are hard, and we all need, and rightfully so, a pat on the back on occasion. I think recognition is a good thing. And then this other incentive, the altruism, the selflessness, we have to understand that this isn't personal. It's not about us as individuals. It's about our organization. And we want what's best for our organization. So let's talk about the benefits of knowledge transfer. But before I go into the benefits, anybody want to share any stories of barriers to knowledge transfer they might have experienced without necessarily knowing that it was a barrier? All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to the benefits of knowledge transfer. Benefits range from tactical to strategic. Capturing knowledge before it leaves is huge and vastly important. You might be able to step change your productivity. It might be able to increase your speed or agility, and you might be able to transform an organization's bottom line. Doesn't everybody love to hear that? We can make our bottom line better. We might be able to increase relationships or create new relationships between staff that may not have existed before. We've got a much better conducive workplace environment, which is huge to the health and well-being of our library employees. We might be able to reduce risk, and we might be able to save time and money, and who doesn't want to do that? These are all just great things that can come through this process. So, before I get into the conclusion here, this process takes a long time. This is not something that you can do in a month or two. 6 months may not even be a long enough process. It takes time and effort, and it is ongoing. You don't just start the project once and then finish it in 18 months and then never look at it again. This is something ongoing that has to be done on a regular basis between everyone within the organization. We are definitely going to finish early today. Any questions before I go into the conclusion? All right, we are going to go ahead and move forward. So, again, as I talked about how this webinar came to being in the first place, is people will continue to change jobs or retire. There is significant opportunity for all of our organizations in strategic and targeted knowledge transfer. Technology has created a larger gap between outgoing and incoming workforces, therefore increasing the demand for knowledge transfer at the organizational level. Retaining critical knowledge in order to perform core processes seamlessly as a workforce is crucial, and knowledge transfer can help with that. So you want to select a knowledge transfer method that suits your workplace. And it may just be the current situation you're talking about. You may have to use more than one method of knowledge transfer processes, or you may have to use a different method for different topics. It all just depends on who's involved in that project and process. You want to make sure that you can ensure flexibility on hierarchical structures and respect an individual's values. You definitely want to consider and encourage a two-way communication model. You want to have a knowledgeable management database. You want to make sure that your processes and procedures you follow to transfer knowledge are written down somewhere. You can provide a policy manual on knowledge transfer. And you want to recognize those successes. So at this point, I am completely open for questions, and I have quite a bit of time on my hands. You will be receiving the 1 hour of credit for this webinar, even though we took the 30 minutes. Your biggest problem is time. Okay, Jackie, can you elaborate on that for me? I think a lot of us would agree, without even knowing details, that a lot of our problems are time. So I'd love to be able to talk through that with you. And again, anyone else have any questions, feel free to type those in. Having time to train someone on a second job task. Absolutely. Jackie, I think that's a great example of having a real-life situation of having the time and training someone on a second job task to cover for each other when someone's out of the office. This is where multiple levels of knowledge transfer can help you. You might want to, in addition to having a one-on-one training with the individual, it probably does need to be written down so that the policy and procedure can be reviewed on paper by an individual. That's kind of that push-out method where they can go and look for it and be reminded of the tasks, be it for opening or closing the library or working in your Makerspace lab or something like that, where they're just filling in for the day, just a quick ready reference guide that they can reference to help them get through the day of doing that second task away from their everyday job. That's a great example. And then Alicia, we're so busy doing our own jobs, it's hard to stop and take time to train someone else. It's so true. It's absolutely, we're all doing more with less. We all completely recognize that. But it is important that we keep our services seamless. And again, it's not personal, it's not about the individual, it's about making sure our organization can sustain and maintain and thrive in the things that they need to do as an organization. And that's what I learned in my 2 long absences at work, is that while I ran my own program at the time, somebody else needed to know how to do that job. Because again, I was unable to be there due to unforeseen circumstances. So again, we have to be prepared. Any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, if we don't have any other questions at this time, Alicia's got some great comments down there. It does take more time to go ahead and do things up front before a person goes, but it is worth it in the long run instead of trying to start from scratch when a person leaves. That's a really good point there. Again, any other questions or comments, concerns, feel free to go ahead and type those in. I'm going to go ahead and shift us over here to our closing screen. We want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for helping sponsor today's webinar. We have got some really awesome trainings coming up over the next month, and you can visit the CE calendar for those, as well as other webinars and trainings that are coming up. Again, in the bottom left-hand corner there is a copy of the handout that was sent via your email, as well as a handout with all the full-page slides on there. If you're not following us on social media, I encourage you to go ahead and do so. We place a lot of activities and information on upcoming trainings and other events going on for library development. So that includes technology, continuing education, our children's and youth services. You can find lots of good information on there. And before we leave here today, I am going to go ahead and open up a browser window for you for our survey. It's just a quick 5 questions. If you could fill that survey out for us on today's training, we would greatly appreciate it. This feedback is important not only to us, but also to the Institute for Museum and Library Services, who helps fund our webinars. So if you could fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. That's all I have for today. I'm happy to stay around and take questions or comments. If not, and you're ready to exit out, click the X in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.